Hey everyone, welcome back to AWS On Air. We are live here in Las Vegas, Nevada at reInvent 2023. And this year we're on the expo floor and you can see all of the folks having a good time in the expo behind us. So if you are here, feel free to come by the booth and find the hosts and say hi, or just kind of watch us filming this. But like I've said before in the weeks coming up to this, we're doing this for all of the folks who cannot make it here, so you can hear about all of the latest and greatest releases and features released here at reInvent. So again, my name is Jeff Marushak. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect on the AWS DoD Air Force team, and this is my third reInvent, once as a customer and twice as an employee. And today, this segment, we are joined with our friends from Veracode, and I'd like to introduce Tim and Eric. Could you guys introduce yourself real quick?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Tim Jarrett. I'm a VP of Product at Veracode. Eric?
Yep. Hey guys, my name's Eric Kim. I'm the Senior Solutions Architect that covers our North American channel partners at Veracode.
Great. So we want to talk about Veracode Fix, and as all of our viewers have known, we've been talking about generative AI all year this year, and we've been talking about code generation products. And before we started filming, I was talking to Tim. I was like, so we have AWS Code Whisperer. We've been talking about that. You've probably tuned in the segments about that. But Veracode Fix is slightly different, but along the same lines. So why don't you guys kind of explain kind of what's similar, or first of all, explain what Fix is, and then say how it is similar or different to Code Whisperer.
Sure, Jeff. So Veracode Fix is a product that's designed to help customers to reduce their security debt, the outstanding number of open security findings that they have in the code that they've written. As a generative AI use case, it's a little different than what Code Whisperer or other Gen AI products for coding do, because rather than kind of being a kind of a general purpose toolkit for writing code, it's really tightly focused on helping you rewrite the code that you already have to eliminate those security issues.
Yeah, so for example, with Code Whisperer, me, I'm not a big developer, but I would write sort this array with a bubble sort, and boom, Code Whisperer would come up with some function suggestions. So what would Veracode Fix kind of do in that situation? And you don't have to do a bubble sort example, but some sort of example. Kind of explain how that would work.
Yeah, so just in general, and Eric, you can kind of talk through the flow a little bit, but rather than starting off with that sort of open-ended prompt, we're usually starting with a list of security problems in the code and saying, here's the ones that we want to go in and get rid of with Veracode Fix. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about how it's used?
Yeah, exactly. So the overall goal of Veracode Fix is to take those known vulnerabilities or flaws, right? We've done the scan, we've looked at the code, we know where our flaws reside, but the goal is to then take those flaws and be able to generate an automated fix for them, so you can kind of get ahead of the curve when you start looking at, I've done a scan, I've got 800 flaws, but I've got X number of time to actually remediate them. Where do I go? How do I do this really quickly? And so what Fix can do is you can take a scan, like take a Veracode static scan, run it in whatever way you want to do that, whether it's your ID, whether it's a pipeline scan, whatever it is, get the results back, and then put it through our AI engine. And what our AI engine will then do is then take a known set of CWEs and responses, and then give you back an actual code fix for the flaw that you're looking at. And so from a development standpoint, it's fantastic because you can go and run your scan, get the results back, get the actual fix for it, and right away go and deploy that so that you know that you fixed that flaw right in that same area. And what's really cool is that all the flaws that we're fixing and the remediation guidance that we're giving from that standpoint, it's all proprietary and it's all created in-house by the Veracode research team, right? So there's no issues with using any kind of OpenAI information and things like that. It's all done proprietary from Veracode's side.
Gotcha. So I think that the names of the services, really, if you look at Fix, it is there to use generative AI to fix these security vulnerabilities. And you had a good point about being part of your pipeline, because sometimes code is written by hand. A lot of times it's copy-pasted, or it's, we all know object-oriented programming, you just kind of grab this and grab this. But something might not be a vulnerability today, but next month it might be after it's identified. And sometimes, I mean, you can be continually scanning, but I could see where Fix would play a role there down the road as part of your pipeline to see something that pops up that wasn't a vulnerability before, now is.
Yeah, a lot of the cases that we see with customers, they're issues that they've not focused on fixing, either because there are a lot of the issues and it takes too long to go through unless you have some sort of automation assistance to do it, or because it just wasn't vulnerable at the point where they were looking at the code before. And if they change that function and now it's taking input from a user, maybe the code was doing something potentially unsafe before, but now it's really subject to attack because you can get data into the outside, from the outside into the application at that point, and then all of a sudden you're vulnerable. And so being able to wire these tools together as close as we can to the developer when they're making those changes allows the developer to, number one, quickly figure out that they've got a problem, and number two, use the capabilities that Veracode Fix provides to very quickly turn around and fix to that issue. And we know that that's a problem historically because developers don't necessarily have the security knowledge. They don't necessarily know the best way to go out and fix the issue, so they might spend a lot of time searching for solutions or going to general purpose code platforms. I haven't looked at Code Whisperer, so I'm not going to say anything about that, but other general purpose code platforms that we look at sometimes don't really know the difference between a secure solution and an insecure one. So by being able to provide something that's specifically focused on fixing security issues, we help give the developer assurance that they're putting in a fix that's actually going to work.
Yeah, and I think, Eric, you mentioned it a little bit before. It's not using customer data for training, or the fixes are proprietary. Can you talk a little bit more why your customers should trust these fixes that Veracode Fix is suggesting?
Yeah, it's a real big part of the product, right? And we've seen that boom of AI, especially the last year or two. We've been working on this product for many, many more years than that, right? We just happened to kind of release it in the middle of this ChatGPT, generative AI kind of explosion. But our research team has been working on this for years. We have 17 years of experience in the AppSec industry. We have loads of data that we can bring up and look at. And what our research team does is it takes that and then it applies it to these models, right? And so instead of taking publicly accessible code, or if somebody goes and scans with whatever AI tools out there, there's a possibility of IP leakage. There's a possibility of your proprietary data being out there. All of that kind of gets eliminated by using by the Veracode Fix model. And that's really key, because when you want to go and deploy something secure, you don't want to introduce other security risk into that as well, right? You don't want to go and say, okay, well, I fixed the security flaw, but now I have to worry about, well, is this something that's proprietary that from somebody else that I've used and borrowed and been in trouble for that?
Which might have gotten me in the problem in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is a really important part of who Veracode is. Customers have trusted us to scan, hundreds of trillions of lines of code with us over the years, and we want to make sure that they are able to trust us with the application of generative AI here as well, by ensuring that there's no way, by design, that their code can ever get mingled into somebody else's.
Okay, so can you fill me in? It sounds like there's released vulnerabilities that everyone's aware of, and that you said that Veracode works on proprietary fixes for those. So explain to our viewers kind of where does the AI ML, where does the generative portion of Fix come in?
Yeah.
And I know we weren't able to have a demo, but I think maybe that would have come through in that. But can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's important to kind of spell out the difference in the sorts of issues that we're finding. So there are known vulnerabilities in open source software. Those are the ones that generally get official numbers from the National Vulnerability Database.
Yep.
You talk about CVEs, right? Yep. And fixing a CVE is not complicated in the code. Basically, you're saying, I want to take this version of the library that I'm using and bump it to this other version. It's straight string substitution. You don't need an AI solution for that. All the complexity in fixing, open source libraries is the complexity of using software, because maybe the API changed in that library and you have to test and that sort of thing, right? Yeah. But from the perspective of actually changing the code, no generative AI is really needed. Now, contrast that with, I'm a developer and I've coded an unsafe way to access my database, and I've done it in some language using some framework that, is not commonly used. There's a lot of my proprietary code in that. There's no CVE attached to that, but it's just an unsafe way of writing the code. You can't really take a plug and chug approach to that sort of vulnerability fix, because it's not as simple as swapping out a version number of a library. It's a question of rewriting this line of code and maybe replacing it with a couple of different lines of code that say, this is how I want to handle that input from the user in such a way that it's safe. So our Gen AI is really taking the code that the customer has as kind of one part of the prompt almost, taking the example of how to fix that class of problem. And so part of the AI is also recognizing what class of problem it is, right? But taking the how to fix as another part of the prompt, and then using the Gen AI to rewrite the code in such a way that, number one, it compiles, which is kind of important and which is like the first hurdle that you got to clear. Number two, that it's applying that good quality fix that has come from the 17 years of research that Eric talked about. And number three, that fix is actually going to, kind of close out that issue in such a way that the next time you run it through your pipeline, it's not going to trigger an alert from the static scanning tool.
Gotcha. That's cool. All right. So, do you guys have any examples, like a typical vulnerability, maybe that you've seen, or maybe like if we were demoing something, you would show off like a typical type of example that Fix would find and put in a change?
Yeah, I mean, the most simple ones, if you look at kind of a generic Java application, that's usually where we go and demo that, right? You'll run it through the static scanner. It'll come back with, let's say, 5 CWEs that it's caught, right? And those are the flaws that are open in the code. We then take that, run it through the Fix engine. The Fix engine would kind of analyze, the patterns and what it looks like, and look at those CWEs, and then it would say, hey, we found, this is a problem in the code. Which one do you want to look at and fix? And then you'd pick from a list and say, I want to choose CWE 89. Okay. That's the one that I want to fix. Click that one, and then we would then go and actually generate the code that goes in to actually fix that flaw. Usually gives you a couple of options, because it just kind of depends on what that application is. We leave that to the end developer to kind of look at and say, hey, this is what fits, what doesn't fit. They choose from it, and that will actually give you the actual line of code that gets put into the application. You pick the one, it puts it into there, you go right into the application itself. It covers that vulnerability. If it's like a SQL injection or something like that, then it'll go in there and actually give you the parameters to put in and fix the actual code that's underlying there.
So that code might look like something, a lot of people have heard of the Bobby tables example, right? You've got a line of code that's selecting a query from your database, and in the middle of that code string is plus, variable that came from the outside, plus, right? And you can, if you craft the right string, you can actually put something in there that's like drop table or, some other sort of attack, right? And so the way that you deal with that, you can, and we see developers try to do this, you can try to sanitize or filter that string to get rid of control characters, but the safest thing to do is to use the language feature of parameterized queries and rewrite the code in such a way that it's just not vulnerable to that attack. And that's what our Veracode Fix engine will recommend that you do. Yeah, and it will automatically do that for you.
So it's bad practice to name my table drop table.
It's not recommended. Most databases won't let you do that, thankfully.
Yeah. So, and I also see, and this might be slightly ignorant on my part as I'm not a big developer, but it seems like maybe developers would just not care as much about security as much. And I don't want to speak for all developers, but now this is going to help them be more aware come compile time and maybe bring it more forward in their minds. If this is happening during the pipeline, during the compile, during your CI/CD pipelines, instead of being what we typically see as very reactionary. And I know what Veracode is trying to be more proactive versus reactive, but I think this is not only helping IT, but the developers themselves to bring that forward of mind as well.
Yeah, I think, as a very former developer myself, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that developers don't care about security. What they don't do is they don't like somebody coming to them very late in the process with something that's going to blow their schedule, right?
I appreciate that. You said it way better than I did, yes.
And we know that from all the conversations we've had with developers who get upset about this stuff, right? But if we can lower the cost of the fix by actually giving them something that we can drop into the code, it goes from, I don't even want to look at that, to, hey, I can actually clear up these warnings before this code hits the pipeline, so I'm not the one that breaks the build. So, I've actually made things better. And in my experience, most developers do want to have their code run clean and to check in without problems. And that's where we're trying to bring security as early as we can in the process. So there aren't those last-minute surprises, and they can actually get to production faster and safer.
Yeah. So all developers, I apologize. I did not mean to offend anyone, but you understand what I was getting at. This is really cool. So we're here at AWS reInvent. How does Veracode Fix run on AWS?
Great question. So the actual AI heart of it runs on SageMaker. We've actually gone through a couple of different iterations of technology before finding SageMaker, and it's great for the purposes that we need it to be. Runs the models really well and allows us to serve customers the way that we need to. There's a bunch of Kubernetes involved. There's a bunch of kind of other technologies behind the scenes that we're leveraging for different parts of what Veracode does. A lot of stuff in the data layer of what we do, in the data lake that informs some of the research that we do and that sort of stuff. But from Veracode Fix perspective, we're primarily talking about SageMaker and a couple of different AWS regions.
Great.
Yeah, and then beyond that, we mentioned Code Whisperer a little bit. One of the things that we're working on from the partnership side is trying to figure out how we can kind of work with Code Whisperer and Fix together, because we're both generative AI, machine learning kind of engines that approach code a little bit differently, right? And see how we can leverage both of those solutions into making the developer journey along AWS that much better.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. So we're about running out of time. So anything else you guys want to leave our viewers with? Any little tidbits, or where can they go to look for more information about Veracode Fix?
Sure. So, obviously starting on Veracode.com, there's a lot of information there about Veracode Fix and some of the other things that we're talking about at the show. There are free trials available of some of our capabilities there. And then, the other thing is we did talk about the fact that most developers don't know about the security problems that we're helping them to solve. We also have a capability called Veracode Security Labs, which is about training developers on how to solve those issues. And there's a community version of that tool that's available from Veracode.com that they can try as well.
Cool. Well, Eric and Tim, thank you very much for filling us in all about Veracode Fix. Thanks for being here.